Welcome to Church 3.0, presented by Apollos, a podcast where we explore the nuances of modern Christian culture and the challenges of cultivating community while maintaining impact and relevance in the church. Join Tyler Vance, COO of Apollos, as he talks to church leaders from around the world to gain a deeper understanding of the Christian faith in a modern context. Push boundaries, change lives, create a more hopeful future.
Hey, thank you for joining us today. I've got a super special guest, and we have so much to cover. We're going to jump right in. Dr. Kregg Hood, thank you for being with us today. If you don't know Kregg, he is a national leader in the nonprofit space. He deals with finance and stewardship-related ministry efforts. He has multiple books and teaching programs on tithing and Christian financial wisdom that have been used by more than 4,200 churches across the country. Kregg, you have recently served as the Chief Business Officer of Convoy of Hope, and you've been the Senior Vice President at AG Financial, the President of EDC Communications, a university professor, and a pastor. You're a professional speaker, a corporate trainer, a communications coach, and a facilitator of all different kinds of things. That is a list of lists. Thank you for spending time with us today. And I'm so thankful to have you on with us.
Oh, well, thank you. I'm excited to be with you as well.
Kregg, you and I actually first met not in the church space, but in a business meeting that was happening here in Oklahoma City that you had come in to speak about. And we connected over business and then realized we had a lot of church stuff in common. So it was a pretty fun engagement. And you are there at the Convoy of Hope offices in Springfield today. So thank you for joining us.
Oh, my pleasure.
From there.
Yeah, thank you. My pleasure, really.
Yeah. Well, we're gonna get started. You've had a lot of experience and a lot of influence when teaching pastors about generosity in the local church. What are some of the things that you often begin asking them when you engage first to kind of discover their generosity journey in their local church?
Oh, yeah, that's a great way to start. Whenever, and it's a little different because sometimes I've come in where they've asked me to come in, so it's easy to jump in. And sometimes it's more like along the way, when you're visiting with people. But primarily, I always like to find out as quickly as possible, what are you doing right now to help people grow in their giving? That's obviously a biblical theme because Paul talks about it many times, as Jesus really speaks on money a lot. And then you can tell, not just from what they say, but how they say it, if this is an area of maybe excitement, or if it's an area of maybe even dread. If they think of giving, any church, any pastor who thinks of giving as an errand or as a chore, as a responsibility only, is probably leading a church that doesn't. It may give okay, but it's okay compared to what? But a church that's excited about, really, it's not just giving, it's what giving's going to let them do. So it's going to be about the gospel, it's going to be about ministry, it's going to be about growth, it's going to be about discipleship. Giving is part of that experience that gets you there. And so I can tell pretty fast if they're positive or negative, if they're knowledgeable or if they don't understand, or if they're hesitant, because sometimes their biggest deal is I don't know how to do this well, so I don't do it at all. So there's a lot of things I just look for.
Yeah. Well, to click in a little bit layer deeper there, when you have a pastor that's really excited about giving, you're saying, hey, we typically see a higher generosity level. When you have a pastor that's a little hesitant about giving, they have a lower generosity level. What are some of the reasons why someone would be hesitant to talk about giving in the context of local church?
There's probably three that pop to mind. The first one is they may be hesitant because they don't give, right? So it's kind of hard to ask people to do something, especially, you think about being authentic. How can you ask somebody to do something that you don't do? So that's number one. Number two, it could be that they're uncomfortable because there's so much negative press about asking people to give.
Sure.
And some of it is legit. I think most of it is an overconfidence or an overbelief in what came about years ago when the seeker movement started. Because, guys like Bill Hybels and Rick Warren and different ones who I have enormous respect for the ministry that they built years ago. They used to talk about doing these surveys with the unchurched, and the unchurched, the first thing they would criticize was people asking for their money. Well, there's some validity to that, but I would have argued maybe it's the way it's done, right? And maybe it's just a stereotype, because who knows what kind of background that they came from. Certain groups are very hard-nosed about giving, other groups not so much. So that'd be number two, is their background negative attitude that it might be hurting their ministry. But the third one, and to me, the biggest key, is they don't see giving as an opportunity to grow. Discipleship, closeness to God, see God work. They don't see it as an invitation. They see it more as an obligation. So those are maybe the three biggest reasons to me why giving does struggle.
You said it really quickly, but if pastors themselves are generous or not, click into that. I think for most of the people listening, that would be like, you're telling me pastors are not tithing themselves?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's part of it. The reason why pastors won't teach on tithing is because they don't tithe. And so you can use a biblical argument against tithing because you say that, well, that was Old Testament and we're now in the New Testament. And there's a case to be made for that. I'm not going to say that it's just ridiculous, but I will say the whole concept behind the tithe, if you go back even into the Old Testament, the tithe was really a symbol of the total. So the tithe represented, if you give 10%, and by the way, I wrote about this in my first book, that was true of Egyptian, Hittite, Babylonian empires as well, is the sense of I'm giving this back to the God, right? But in God's way, our God, we really saying it's all yours, God. So that the 10th was simply God's way, and you see this in Malachi 3 and other places too, of saying, you're committed to me first and foremost. And it moves into lots of different other areas. But what happens is people, especially if they're not paid well, because a lot of preachers are not paid well, a lot of pastors are not paid well. The majority, as we know, are bivocational. They're in churches of around 80. That's the average size church in America. And so consequently, they are looking at their money just like everybody else would. And they're thinking, how am I going to afford to give at all, let alone 10%, if I'm really strained? So you put all that together, and it's something, if they can talk themselves out of it biblically, then they will. And there's another piece of this that doesn't always get talked about, and that is the approach. It's mostly from the Catholic Church, the idea of giving alms. So in the Catholic Church, there's a strong emphasis on giving, but it's not so much about the amount, but it's talking about giving alms to the poor, right? So because we have such a strong growth among the Spanish-speaking people here in America, a lot of them have Catholic backgrounds. They come to churches. And I've spoken in quite a few, and I'm friends with quite a few Hispanic pastors, and they tell me their people coming from Catholic backgrounds have a real difficult time understanding tithing because it's not their background. They're used to giving alms, so it's small amounts. But he said that's just kind of cultural. So there's a whole range of reasons why not only churches don't tithe, but even individually, the pastor is afraid to tithe or is not sure how to tithe because of other expenses.
Sure. Yeah. I I think when you and I first had some conversations, that was a shocking thing even to me. And so I think that'll probably be shocking for people to hear. But also out of that, like tithing as an act of discipleship, I think that just ties in so much to as pastors first. It's hard to lead someone to a place that you are not.
Well, and I
Right.
really want people understand. Don't make a legalistic thing out of this. Okay.
Sure.
I can make the case for the theological significance of a tithe, the tenth equals the total. But here's the deal. At the end of the day, when I am giving, from my heart, I'm not going to stop at a tithe if I can help it. I'm not going to look at the tithe as the ceiling. I'm going to look at it as the floor. And even if I can't get there right away, my heart is going to be, I'm going to keep giving until the Lord helps me get to the tithe.
Yeah.
And I always encourage people, well, why not just jump in and see what he does? Because I give you lots of examples of unusual things that happen you can't explain. So anyway, I don't like for people to focus too hard on the tithe, thinking like that's the end all be all. It's really about generosity. Tithing,
Yes.
I had one pastor tell me one time, he said, and he didn't believe you had to tithe to be saved or had to tithe to be obedient, but he said, Craig, when we used your book, did your program, taught on tithing, he said, what we found is our people were hungry for a standard.
Sure.
And so giving them something to shoot for without being legalistic about it and showing them why it ties in with our walk with God and our walk as ministering, servants of the Lord. We're all supposed to serve, not just the preachers. Has helped a lot. I think it's helped a lot.
Yeah. No, you introduce, you talk about it in a way, Craig, that I think a lot of people need to hear. Let me say a different thing.
Okay.
I don't desire to still be reading the scripture in the same understanding I was 20 years ago. Right? I have a desire, a hunger to have a deeper understanding, to have a deeper appreciation, to have just a deeper intimacy with the scripture. If what you're saying is generosity is a part of discipleship, then why would I choose to have stagnation in that area of my spiritual formation when I don't choose to have stagnation in other areas?
Shouldn't. Yeah.
Right. And so uh, uh, how do you get people to navigate towards that concept, that the thing you say it just so naturally out of the presence of who you are. How do you get others to that place as you're leading in churches and in businesses, honestly, across the country?
It does go back to what you said just a few minutes ago. It's that in my walk with the Lord, do I want to go deeper? Do I want to have more? And so just set the generosity theme aside for a moment and just start there. Do I want to grow closer to God? Yes. Do I want to follow him better? Yes. Is that out of some kind of worry I'm going to hell? No. Is that even out of some worry that I'm in some kind of disobedience? Well, we're all going to make mistakes, right? So, but it's more like the cry of my heart is, Lord, I want to be close to you. I mean, Jesus said it. Love, the most important command, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, strength, and mind. Second, love your neighbor yourself. I need to want to do that. So then generosity is just one of those topics, like the fruit of the Spirit, or like the Beatitudes, or, just pick anything you like. So I sometimes have said to the pastor, I said, when you preach giving right, it's kind of like preaching on how to help husbands love their wives or wives love their husbands, or how parents can work, be better parents to their children. So you're really just giving them a more holistic look at what it means to follow deeply with the Lord.
Yeah, I mean, and like how do you have this fruit of the Spirit without generosity?
It's pretty
Right?
tough.
I mean, show me an expression of love that does not have generosity in it.
Yeah.
Show me an expression of peace that does not have generosity in it. Show me an expression. You could go through them, and generosity becomes the unlock for so many discipleship things. In the local church, we think of generosity as the tithe, as a recurring gift most of the time. But generosity, as Jesus teaches, is the posture of the heart. It is the over and abundance, right? Malachi would say, right, test me in this. Like the 10% is the test. it is it is the floor, like you said, just the not the ceiling.
I'll tell you
So
another thing too, that is a real aha. Okay, is the Malachi 3 passage that you just referenced. Test me in this. It was never rescinded. That
hmm
promise is never rescinded. I compare it to the rainbow promise with Noah.
mm,
And see, it's funny how nobody criticizes your use of the rainbow promise as an example of God's ongoing promise to never destroy the world by water again. Well, it's in the Old Testament. It's not repeated in the New Testament. How come you believe the rainbow promise, but you don't believe Malachi 3?
mm.
And I'm like, I'll leave it alone and say, hey, you wrestle with that. Because I don't see the difference.
Yes.
But
Listen,
not to be
Craig.
legalistic. See, that's the thing.
No.
I'm just saying, look, I would one preacher one time, he was kind of taking issue with me, and I go, look, I'm not saying you got to believe the way I believe. I'm just making a case. If you disagree, that's your business. But hey, I think you ought to at least engage with me on why these are the conclusions.
Yeah. And we are not afraid to get spicy in our conversations, Craig. I will say that. But I think you have introduced a new level today, and I do appreciate that. One of the things that you had shared is you just kind of said it off the tip of your tongue. You have a ton of stories of where this is true in local churches.
Mhm.
Would you mind sharing just a couple of those with us?
You mean with the church, like the leader piece, or with what happened with people, or
Yeah, a church that grew both in generosity and their spiritual health, their spiritual fitness, their spiritual
okay.
discipleship.
Well, one of my favorite ones, it just pops to mind is, and this is a mega church, by the way. It's probably, I don't know, 4 or 5,000. And so they give. I mean, this is a church that's given a lot of money, raised money for buildings and missions and ministry. They do a lot right. And their preacher actually is a good friend of mine. So, but because they were always quote unquote meeting budget, they they never did a special emphasis on tithing. And part of it's because they do such a good job just teaching discipleship. And so people would give, right? And then they did a great job talking about what they're going to do with the money. All the good, they did it all good. And so, but they decided, you know what? We should teach on this. So they decided to use my little book series. And again, the emphasis is not on my book series. The emphasis is on taking taking a period of time. So they took the month of June and they said, we want to take the month of June because we don't want people to think that we're trying to get in their pockets. We actually want to take one of the harder times to preach on giving. And we're going to do that because we should. Okay. It should be the right thing to do.
Yeah.
So they did the series, but one of the things that they did was they had a call to action for people to choose to tithe, and they had a little decision card and all this kind of stuff. And not only did the people make the decision, a significant number of people made the decision to start tithing. They saw their giving go up 25% in the month of June, in the summertime. And that was because people saw, well, we should be doing this. And
Yeah.
God is inviting us. So it's not a, wag your finger at them. And it's not a, you better give or else kind of stuff. It's just because it's the right thing to do. And a lot of times when I go in, this is another one I enjoy talking about, is when I go in to speak. A lot of times some preachers are a little fearful of this. And so they'll have me come in and they'll either have me do the first sermon or they'll have me do the second. Because I like to do this, and I learned this from John Maxwell years ago. I like for generosity series more than a generosity sermon. And the reason is because you can hear one sermon and you kind of get inoculated against change, even if you got convicted, but you forget, right? But if you take it and use 4, I like a month. I think you could probably do a 3, but most of the churches have done 4. And I always say use the first sermon as a warm up where you disarm people, that you're not going to try to guilt trip them. Use the last sermon more about the ministry side, and then use the second sermon on tithing. But here's the big difference. Instead of preaching to people on why they ought to tithe or even why they should tithe, you share biblically why you tithe.
Yeah.
So you're really giving a testimony of your own conviction instead of trying to get them to do something. You say, here's why I do this. I say, because who can argue with a testimony?
Yeah.
Even if they disagree, it's your testimony. Then the third week is when I usually encourage them to do something about the giving process, like weekly giving, proportionate giving, first fruits giving, something along that line.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I've loved telling them that. And that's one of the reasons why I think most of the time there's a bump up in giving, because people maybe for the first time, I don't want to criticize any preacher at all, but maybe for the first time they're hearing a positive approach, being consistent, committed givers. And in some cases, here's what happens. People aren't giving at all. And we know the data, and I've researched this myself personally, and on an average basis, 20% of the people give 80% of the money, 30% give 20%. So do the math. That means 50%. And I mean, this is a gut check for a preacher. When you look out there in a typical congregation, half the people you're looking at aren't giving anything. Here you are preaching on giving. I mean, I've seen this replicated through several hundred churches when I've worked with them and they send me their giving data. But nevertheless, so here's what happens: that of that 50% that don't give at all, some will start to give. May not be a lot, but they'll start to give. Of the 30% who are giving but not tithing, some of them will start to tithe. The remainder, the 20% that are giving 80% of the money, they don't feel guilt tripped at all. They're like, this is great. This is right. Yeah, you go, preacher. And so they love that it's part now of the discipleship process more clearly, if it hasn't been. So anyway, I just think a lot of times guys by the way, I always say this when I come in, I guest speaker. One of my first comments in if I do the first sermon, sometimes they bring me in to do the second because the tithe thing is still kind of makes them nervous. But if I come in for the first one of the first things I like to tell the folks is, look, you need to just uncurl your toes. I'm not stepping on, and this series won't do it. And this is actually going to be fun. You're not going to believe it, but we're actually going to have fun with this. Yeah. And I'll use the passage about God loves a cheerful giver. And I've got a whole sermon about that starts with guilt, preaching from guilt. And I just tell them outright, that's unscriptural. And you have God's permission not to do it because I read about not reluctantly or under compulsion. And so I show like 5 levels of giving. It ends with giving is worship. So giving should feel good. That's the title of the sermon, Giving That Feels Good. It should. It should feel good. It can scare us. Trust me. It can scare you to death when you start to think about, oh, God wants us to do what? But that's part of the faith walk.
Yeah, no, it is. You shared a stat. Look, I actually, you shared a few stats. I have a stat that has kind of been front and center in our office for a little while. It's that 80% of generosity in churches comes from a baby boomer generation or older. What is your insight into the landscape of giving in the local church as that? I mean, there's a shelf life of generosity that we need to be thinking about in the local church. And how do you kind of lean into that? And what's your quick take on that?
Okay, quick. Yeah. Well, first of all, anybody that wants to know the latest stuff needs to get the Barna report. Okay. Yeah. And I'll tell you, a really good version of that is the one Thrive It does. I've been on a webinar with them. Okay. Excellent. And I will say it because you see exactly what you're saying. You see the demographics built by kind of the age groups. And not only that, they talk about 5 ways of giving and how people at different ones of these age groups or life experience groups emphasize different ones, right? Anyway, so that's worth looking at. Second thing, and I think this is a big key, is when you look at the data, you got to realize it is nearly impossible to get totally accurate data.
Sure.
Okay. And especially with percentages, because there's no way we're going to pull everybody's W-2, there's no way we're going to look at their tax returns, right? So we don't really know the percentage. So what we look at is the trend lines and recognize even then the trend lines are heavily reported more toward a larger church They're
Mm.
reported more toward churches that are used to giving their data, which means you're going to primarily get denominational numbers. You will get independent numbers, but you'd have to choose to participate in the survey. And there's some real sophisticated stuff being done in nonprofit, not just in church, but
Yeah.
other charitable deals. So I always tell people, look, here's the deal. Whatever's going on, you're going to see some adjustment in the trend line. But what you really want is make vision the key. Because you can buck the trend line. It happened during COVID. You can buck the trend line with great vision. And consequently, when I think about, the whole givers, like the baby boomers now, it's interesting because they used to be the great generation before that.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
People. So there is some, and nobody knows, but in the stewardship, circles that I've run in, the view is we don't know yet if people actually as they grow into a new, stage in their life, they may give more, because you think about the boomers, and a lot of them are, once you get your kids out of college, honestly, once you get your kids out of college, I tell people when your kids are out of college, you just got a tax-free raise, but well, you're still raising your kids, and and of course mortgages are crazy. There's seasons in life that are much more difficult. But when you
Yeah.
get to that point, if you have a generous heart, you are able to do more. And even if
Yeah.
you're like, I'm now in that semi-retired stage where we aren't giving as much, but we are giving more than and I'm not bragging at all, because any dollar I give, I think, well, God, gave me way more than that. So I always think of it more in terms of my own personal growth. But we don't, we still wait past the tithe. The tithe was our
Yeah.
floor a long time ago.
Yeah.
If anything, I think our heart should be, I want to find ways to give more. Even if I'm given what I think God wants me to do, it's like, is there some way to do more? Is some way to give more? Right.
Yeah.
But not out of duty, not out of guilt, just because I want to see the kingdom advance.
Well, and I want to, one of the things you said there is types or ways that they give, and I want to click into that.
Uh-huh.
Generationally, are you saying that you see gift types come in legitimate different methods,
Oh,
like
yeah.
ACH and credit card, and
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And
explain that?
COVID sped that whole thing up. I mean, there are not many churches that quote unquote pass the plate anymore.
Sure.
It's almost all now. They're boxes. Most people put a box in the back of the building, and that's not new. It's just, it wasn't common. But ACH, go online, create an account. There's text to give. There's, the typical 4 ways to give. So, but you will see, I do see with the younger ones, some type of electronic payment. So again, for a preacher, if he wants to be a good kind of a stewardship, leader and be a good tactician, you better have all of the electronic opportunities. And what you got to do too is not make it seem like such an ordeal. You got to make it, hey, here's the ways you can give, and and kind of like, this is just a normal thing for us to talk about, instead of being afraid to talk about it. Like, people are going to think we're trying to get in their pocket.
Yeah. You said something. I don't want to like double down. I'm going to give you my hot take. Churches that don't pass a bucket frustrate the daylights out of me. And here's why. As a parent, there are very few ways I can visually teach my kids generosity.
That's true.
And so both of my kids are at the age where they're making money doing things, right? And I am teaching them generosity. But there's no place to allow them to express. My kids are not old enough to have a debit card or a checking account, and so where am I supposed to teach them as a parent the act of generosity in a church that does not pass a plate? So that's my personal rant.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about that, but you're right.
It's just one of those things that to go back to it is a spiritual formation. It is a discipleship. It is not just how it serves you and your church. It is how we are allowing people to move in their journey.
There is certainly no reason not to do the both and,
No.
In fact, here's a funny one for you. So this has been a few years now, but I used to be against using credit card and letting church members do that. I used to be against the whole sign up for recurring giving. And I said, kind of what you said. I said, there's something about the offering, the conscious intent. In fact, my wife and I, we always wrote a check every
Sure.
week, even though, she was a school teacher, got paid once a month. And as the preacher in the churches that I served, I got paid every other week. And even the companies that I own, we set it up with our payroll twice a month, right? And it does say, give as you prosper, like all that.
Yeah.
I just thought the habit of weekly giving was worth something spiritually, right? So anyway, I would tell pastors all that stuff. I kept watching the growth of giving from the use of credit cards and online stuff. And I finally decided my theology wasn't strong enough because giving was so I'm like, okay, pastor, it's all right. Go ahead and do that. It's fine.
Yes.
But you do give up a little bit. You give up the symbolism, like with your child.
Yeah, I don't, and I will clarify. That's a good call out. I don't desire that for my wife and I.
Yeah.
I want to,
for them.
Our method of generosity, just from a personal perspective, is we adjust our recurring giving as we have, as we feel God calling us to do that, right? So we make adjustments with that, but I don't want to touch it every week. I don't want to see it is such a first thing for us that that's how we want to operate. So I don't desire to write a check every week. I don't want to go back to that. I just want a method to be able to show and teach my kids that and give them a space to begin their generosity journey, because it is going to begin from them of, my son's caddying at a golf course, right? Like he needs to begin to do that in a way that facilitates for him.
Yeah, that's good.
And so if we're going to talk about spiritual journey and discipleship of that, we've got to be able to connect with all points along the way.
I did talk to a pastor this past week, now that you mention it, and I'm trying to remember which one it was, but he did tell me they were adding the plates back at their church.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't imagine that is going to be a significant source of generosity. To your point, the card giving, and especially as we're recently leaning into an Apple Pay experience for generosity, we see that taking off like crazy. And one of the things you had shared is you have a close relationship that did not want to move from ACH giving into card giving because of fees. Explain that, talk through that. And what would you say to that?
Well, I just said, I hear you. I hear you. I understand that does add up to real money. But I said, having said that, there's just more people who give, and who give typically at higher amounts because they want to use their credit card. It's easier for them. They like the points. I know. But it's kind of like, hey, why wouldn't you make it easier? And then if possible, like at Convoy, when we added that, we redid our payment gateway about 3 or 4 years ago. And one of the things I had our team do is to add a checkbox for people who give online at Convoy, which is significant, that says, I want to contribute 3% of this gift, an extra 3% to cover the credit card fees. Because that's about what it costs. That's rounded up a little bit, and over last numbers I saw, it was close to 2/3, not quite, just under 2/3 of the people checked the box. Anyway, so it's kind of, to some degree, that one for me is a little more of a pragmatism thing, is to make it easier for people. Plus, here's another thing, and it's just pragmatic, but one of the things I used to teach on all the time was, and I still think it's valid, but I teach people, what do you do when you're on vacation? What do you do when
Mm.
you're not there? And I would talk about making up when you're gone. And I mean, this was a big deal years ago. We remind people in the summer months, hey, be sure and, leave your contribution or put it in the mail, send it to us, because obviously the mystery goes on. There's nice ways to say it, right? Well, that's
Yeah.
one thing about recurring giving where it's automated. You don't have to worry about forgetting. You don't have to worry about leaving, your check on the counter and then taking it back later and being out of town and forgetting and, stuff like that.
Yeah. Well, I think in our conversations, one of the things that came up was it's hard to measure what you don't have.
That's right. That's right.
Right. And
Right.
what we see is new givers specifically want to engage with a digital wallet giving experience. Um, and so if you measure that against your ACH fees, you're never going to win the game. But you don't have that giving today, and so it's really hard to measure that.
Yeah. Well, I think some of the people and again, I have a lot of respect for some who hold that view. It's just, I think they don't probably see it the way I do in terms of, I want to help people give more and more often. And that means I need to make it easy and I need to make it clear.
Mm.
And, well, we're probably going to agree to disagree in his particular case because he's a real smart guy, But I'm just saying, look, I think I can show you data, like a mountain of data that says, okay, be a purist if you like. Like I used to be about not using any of the recurring stuff and watch your giving stay like this when it could do like this.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. Craig, we need to have a ton more conversations. Every time you and I get together, it's a joy that fills my heart.
Thank you.
But we do need to wrap up for this conversation.
Time was
I know. Hey, you and I could every time we talk for hours. Let me rapid fire a
Okay.
couple final
And
questions
I'll
at
be
you.
brief.
One mindset shift you wish every church leader would make when it comes to generosity.
To look at it as a way to have fun, to help you the same way you wouldn't, like to help people grow in their prayer life, grow in their Bible reading, grow in their, anything that we read and we teach about and say, this is supposed to feel good.
Yeah.
God loves a cheerful giver. So where are they?
We should be modeling that, reflecting that as we talk about it.
Don't treat it like taking out the trash. I mean, so many guys do. It's like, got to do this now.
Yeah. What's
Hey,
been
by the way,
most-
here's another piece
Yep.
of that, and that is God will do things. He will do wonders among us, from Joshua. Giving helps you get to see that. It's like praying for people.
Oh,
Well, if you pray for people, will everybody have what you pray for? No. Will everybody get, no. Will everybody get a new job? No. The same thing with giving. Does that mean you're automatically not going to be out of debt? No. But you will see things happen you wouldn't have seen if you didn't pray.
yeah. I'm gonna end all rest of the questions. I just want to click in on this. My experience as a pastor. The most crazy stories I saw of God doing things was most often very closely tied around generosity. And yes, a hospital visit, praying over, yes, seeing miraculous things. But if you could heat map it, God did so much around the generosity heart.
I agree.
As a pastor, I knew that, I experienced it, I got to live it, and I desire, if you're looking for the unlock for the people that you shepherd and lead, and you're not looking in the area of generosity, you're missing it.
That's one of them. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Craig, as always, you led us to the right spot at the right moment, and thank you. What we'll do is we'll probably just book another conversation with you to continue talking about generosity. And as we drop this episode, we'll get links to your books and how to connect with you and contact you so that if your heart has been stirred by maybe the prompting for Kregg to be involved in your individual season of generosity as a leader, then he's going to be available for you. And I know he would love to come and partner alongside you in that. Kregg, thank you for our first conversation. I'm just going to go ahead and draw the line in the sand today, and I appreciate your time and your investment in our community and sharing about your experience when it comes to generosity. Thank you so much.
Thank you for letting me share.
Have a great day, guys.
Bye-bye.